of new panelists. I just like to give them a chance to introduce themselves. So first, Katie, would you like to introduce yourself and let folks know who you are and what you do?
I guess so. My name is Katie Moss. I'm an attorney in the Office of General Counsel for TennCare currently for 2 more days, and then I will be Deputy Chief of LTSS, working directly with Patty Killingsworth and leading the TennCare LTSS team. I have just recently been pulled into all of the exciting transformation going on in the REM world. So I think I'm up to speed with where we are and looking forward to seeing all this roll out and supporting the providers and you all as best we can to make this a successful launch. So thanks for letting me participate.
Thank you for participating, Katie. It's really appreciated. Dr. Davis, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Bruce Davis. I'm Deputy Commissioner of Clinical Services for the Department of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. If y'all that were on the call last, well, I guess that was 2 weeks ago, remember, we had a lot of questions arise regarding what is reportable in regards to behavioral incidents. So we asked Dr. Davis to join us. He was instrumental in helping us to write that section of the REM protocol. So he can answer most of your questions or probably all of your questions, and also maybe give some background on why he feels it is important that those types of events are reported. So we will get started. First, I would just like to say that we really appreciate you guys participating in this. You know, we're getting closer and closer to implementation. Once we do implement, we will keep these calls for a period of time and just to offer you guys that support you may need and to answer any questions as implementation begins. And then hopefully, at that point, you guys will be just flying along and things will be going smoothly. But we will have our REM mailbox and that will not be going away at all. So anytime you have questions or concerns, you can submit them there and we will do our best to get you an answer. And we'll always post those questions with the answers on the REM website webpage so that you will be able to go and look. And if you have a question and see if your question may be there and the answer will be there as well. So Katie, we're just going to go right to you with the first question we have today. Who and where do providers send in the additional cost for any provider investigator that they would like trained beyond the one being paid for by the state?
Ooh, gotta find my mute button there. So let me pull this up real quick. So once the agency has been notified by Quilts, by TQI, that they have been granted access to the platform, they will then be required to provide payment directly to Quilts or to TQI electronically via a credit card.
Okay, so this goes back, y'all, to the question we have been getting a lot of when you will be able to go in and take the quilts training. We are really happy that it seems like a lot of you are excited to get this done and want to go in there and begin that training process. So again, you will be contacted. The answer to that question is always you'll be contacted when you are granted access to the platform. Now, I do want the folks to remember who are looking at getting a second investigator trained that we anticipate at this time, it's always been our plan to get that one investigator for each agency trained first before we start on those trainings of the second investigator. Now, remember, it's one investigator per provider per region. But if you want additional investigators, that is at the provider's cost. And again, we'll be looking at putting those in on the people in on the back end so that we can ensure that every provider at least has one trained investigator that can begin the process. So now we're going to move on to Dr. Davis. Now, Dr. Davis, there are a lot of questions for you, but what we have done is we'll do a set of questions with you, and then we'll give you a little break, and we'll come back to you so that you can get that little bit of rest and maybe some water. So the first question is using disengagement techniques, grabs that have been included in the crisis intervention training during a behavioral event considered a restraint?
Yeah, so let me steer this in a slightly different direction. The grab is what you're defending against in this circumstance. So it's when a person supported has grabbed a piece of clothing or has grabbed a body part, grabbed your hair, something like that. And the techniques that are being used in those circumstances are grab releases. So in other words, any contact with the person is for the express purpose of disengaging them from the whatever it is that they have a hold of. And so I don't classify these as restraints in that way. It's more akin to a block, which is not the same thing as a restraint. And it's really the defining characteristic of that is that whatever, so in these types of grab releases, there may be a need to grab the person's wrist, as an example, to stabilize the wrist so that you can peel the person's hand off of your head if it were a hair pull, as an example. And so as long as the amount of stabilization of the wrist or the length of that stabilization of the wrist is only for the time required to remove that hold, remove that grab that someone has done, then that would not be considered a restraint. And Teresa mentioned, why is it important for us to track restraints and to respond to those incidents? I'll just say a little bit about this because it's one of the most invasive things that we do. Now, I'm not including the grab releases and blocking in this. I'm including times when we hold someone, for an extended period of time after a behavioral event. It's an invasive thing. A lot of people use that more as a punishment than as a safety procedure. There is, the possibility of going on way too long with those types of restraints. Certainly, you're exposing not only the person supported, but others to potential injury as a result of using those procedures. And so, in almost every system, this type of response is tracked. And, we look for warning signs within agencies where it's starting to be overused or where, maybe for a particular individual, they're finding themselves in circumstances where they have to use this a lot. And so we would consider that person to be at greater risk as a result of that and would need to take systemic action to try to address that, even in the absence of abuse or neglect, even if they're using it legitimately, but they're just having that level of problem. We need to have triggers within the system that alert us to that and make sure that we're making appropriate intervention. So that's a little bit of the background there. So we'll go to the next question, I suppose.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. And you may have answered this question, but I'm just going to ask it because it was listed separately. Can you explain the difference between a grab and a restraint and the new definition of restraint? Can somebody remind me of the new definition of restraint? Because I want to be sure that I'm responding appropriately to that. And it's been a little while since I interfaced with that. Okay. Sure. Vicki or Jason, can one of you pull up that definition? And we'll just move to the next question while they're finding that for you, Dr. Davis. But to differentiate, I'm going to say, sure, here's the practical way to differentiate between the two. If a person's been attacked and they're being controlled in some manner by the person supported, and that they utilize a temporary stabilization, most likely, I almost wanted to say of a body part, but it would most likely be probably either the wrist, or in some circumstances, if, let's say, there's a bite and a person, bit somebody's arm and has not already disengaged, that they might hold their head just close to their arm for a period until that bite was released.
Those would be the primary types of circumstances where it would be more or less a grab release or a bite release rather than a restraint. And the differentiating factor is that you're being controlled in some manner by the other person. In a restraint procedure, it is the staff controlling the person supported.
Thank you, Dr. Davis.
If that's not clear enough, feel free to ask any clarifying questions related to that.
Sure. Okay. And y'all been through this before, but just a reminder, we will go to the questions in the chat box once we get through the pre-submitted questions. Okay, Dr.
I'm just
Davis.
thinking about one other kind of differentiating factor there. I mean, so at the level of restraint, the person supported is no longer carrying out an aggressive action. I mean, they're being held, so they can't engage in an aggressive action at that point, other than potentially struggling to get loose or out of the restraint.
Thank you for that clarification, Dr. Davis. That was helpful for me. Next question. This is a little bit of a longer question, Dr. Davis. If a person supported has severe pica behavior and has started eating carpet in his room, the circle of support met and decided that it was in his best interest to have the carpet removed. His corporate conservator and BA were also in agreement. BA completes a benefit risk analysis and information was included in the ISP. Does the removal of carpet require a Human Rights Committee review?
So, all right, I'm responding in terms of our current human rights review policy. I don't know if any of us know yet exactly how that's going to look in the integrated world. Is that policy still going to be in place, or is there going to be a modified policy that will be agreed upon at some point?
What I can say to you now, Dr. Davis, definitively is the components that are looked at and the requirements for the HRC when you need to go will remain the same. They may not be in that policy, but wherever they are moved to, it will be the same process.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and respond in terms of the current policy that we have in place, and that is basically it's a human rights review policy. It's not a human rights committee policy. And so essentially the benefit risk analysis, a fading program are required. Then there has to be the consent of the conservator and the assent of the person supported. If all of those pieces are in order, nobody on the circle of support has a concern about implementation of those restrictions, then it can be implemented under that human rights review process. Now, let's talk about some different scenarios. I had a scenario that was actually the one we were discussing yesterday, Teresa, about circumstance where the conservator, this was an interesting case because the conservator was concerned about the restriction that was being put in place. It was unclear, though, that they were concerned whether they had the authority to consent to that thing because some of those issues involved association or whether they just didn't care for the restrictions that were being put in place. And in that circumstance, a conservator does not have to consent to those restrictions and can say no to them, and they can't be done. So if a conservator does not consent, cannot be done. If a person supported does not assent, or others on the circle of support are concerned about it, then that is the trigger for it going to a human rights committee. So when people are in disagreement about the restrictions that are being put in place, that's when that would become a review by the Human Rights Committee. And the Human Rights Committee actually does not have the ability to overturn the consent of the conservator. What they are going to do in that circumstance is review the situation and provide recommendations for what they think needs to be addressed. As an example, in the circumstance you brought up, it might be that they would potentially recommend that you get the consultation of a behavior analyst Actually, I think we did have a behavior analyst in that scenario that was just presented on the carpet. Was that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it was the behavior analyst that recommended it. So, but in some cases, it's just an agency that has put forth the restriction. And in those circumstances, the Human Rights Committee might request some sort of clinical consultation to back up the restriction that that has been put in place. But those would be recommendations to the conservator and to the circle of support, not things that they are forced to do under those circumstances. And this just comes down to Tennessee law and the fact that a conservator can consent to those things, and that we can't overrule that. It's an influence process.
Yes, sir. We have two other really quick Human Rights Committee questions or restriction questions. First one is, if a person supported has a history of explicit inappropriate sexual history, but due to consistent staffing and implementation of the behavior support plan, the behaviors have decreased drastically. Then the level of need is changed from an LON 6 to an LON 4 due to the decreased behaviors. Is there a continued need for HRC?
I'm not going to answer that in a broad way. It actually has to be individual. Boy, it's really tough when you're dealing with sex offending, because that's, for a lot of people, that's a lifelong scenario. Now, I will tell you, though, you can't just respond to people with sex offending histories with a broad brush, because people, just take people who get assigned to the sex offender registry. People get assigned to the sex offender registry for all kinds of different things. Some of them are quite serious and they have a lot more restrictions, and others are not as serious, and they might have been just an isolated incident, but the person ends up getting put on the sex offender registry. So, I think everything has to be done, really should be done in consultation with a clinician who has some background in sex offender assessment. As things are faded, that it needs to be done in consultation with that professional. There is something called the Tennessee Sex Offender Treatment Board. And if you just put that into a search on the internet, you will come up with a number of people throughout the state who are available to do that type of consultation. I'm not saying all of them specialize in working with people with IDD, so a little bit of investigation needs to occur there to determine if they're appropriate. But that is, I think, an important aspect of deciding when to remove restrictions for a person with sex offending history. We had an example of that with a fella just was asked by Buffalo River Services a few days ago to discuss a case of a fella who is on the sex offender registry. He had been on there for quite a few years, like 15, 20 years, but was still being held under the same level of restriction that he had initially, and a number of the staff had been sort of threatened by a probation officer and other aspects of just basically wanting to ensure that they were doing everything to protect the public with this fellow and carrying out all their responsibilities. And so there really needs to be a significant sorting out of that. We don't want to minimize the guy's history just because he's been under supervision for this length of time. Doesn't mean really that you can back off of those things, because as soon as there's an opportunity, certain people who have sex offending histories may go right back into that behavior. And so it really does need to be something that's assessed when a clinician assesses this, a person who's doing a psychosexual assessment does this, they will determine what level of sex offender the person is. So there are people who are like automatic sex offenders, meaning as soon as they get the opportunity. In fact, there are people who will create opportunities to do that. They're actively seeking all the time to do that, versus people who might just find themselves in a situation where it's convenient and engage in that. And that's different levels of risk associated with each of those different types of sex offender. So basically, clinical consultations are very important in determining when to remove restrictions.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. We have one more question in this area. That question is, review for restrictions such as tint on windows, removal of bedroom door, sharps restrictions. Is it, if this information has been added to the ISP and reviewed, does this information need to be added to the ISP and reviewed by the Circle of Support yearly?
Do they need to review it yearly?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I would say that's the minimum time frame over which that has to be reviewed. We basically said whenever the ISP comes due, so any fading plan should require review within the year. And, you know, again, I think there are circumstances where those might be continued for someone, even though maybe they haven't had that many incidents of it, but maybe they haven't had many incidents because they haven't been exposed to the risk that much.
Right.
Part of the fading plan, though, should be some exposure to the risk, you know, in some manner, some safe manner, so that you can assess whether the person still needs the restriction. This is, I will say, this is something that we're up against because not many people really know yet still what we're talking about when we say fading of restraints. And they often ask the question, how do I fade something like sharps? Well, I'll tell you, in my view, if you're doing it under the supervision of the consultation with a clinician who is familiar with that, then you can try some exposures. Maybe it starts with not a very sharp knife and having somebody just assist with preparing the meal or something of that nature. But there are ways that you can go about fading these things, and that's the primary thing that the circle is responsible to do. Sometimes they may say, we're only going to review this annually with someone. So, you know, that would be the least review that they could do.
Sounds great, Dr. Davis. Now we're going to give you a quick little break and we're going to move over to Liz to get some questions about event reporting. But we do have more for you, Dr. Davis, so please don't go anywhere. Liz, behavioral psychiatric consolidated reportable event form. We are non-medical. Would this pertain to us? If so, it is my understanding that information would be listed on the PCSP. Is this only for a member that would have restraints and or behavioral issues noted on the PCSP?
Sure. So the reporting and tracking and trending of reportable events and reportable behavior and psychiatric events, that applies to all providers. Plans of care, such as the PCSP, that may capture the use of a behavior safety intervention or a restrictive behavioral procedure as an appropriate response to the person supported. But it is possible that a person supported may not have behavioral issues noted in their plans of care, but ends up having a behavior event. So, for example, a person supported may not have a history of criminal conduct or aggression noted in their plan of care, but they were arrested because they assaulted their staff or their housemates. And that would be a reportable behavioral event. So as such, there might be instances when a behavior safety intervention or a restrictive behavioral procedure is used that was not captured in the plan of care. So keep in mind, when that happens, you'll want to submit a ref within 1 business day of the event. So as far as the consolidated ref, if the use of a behavior safety intervention or restrictive behavioral procedure is captured as an appropriate response in the person's plan of care, then what will happen is the event management coordinator may submit a consolidated ref, and at the same time, they'll submit the provider reportable event review team minutes. We call that the PERT. They'll submit the ref and those minutes pertaining to those events monthly, and they'll be able to consolidate it to one form. So the PERT is required to review all of those reportable behavioral events at least monthly because they're making sure that the utilization of the interventions is appropriate and that they're performed correctly. So as far as the spreadsheet goes into this question, a provider may find that tracking the events on a spreadsheet is helpful, but we're not requiring that. That was just a simple tool to kind of keep everything organized so it'd be easier for you guys to be able to notice trends going on. So if you'd like to, a review of the reportable event management training that we have online goes into more detail on how you complete the consolidated REF, and it gives you more information on the PERT. And I know that we covered that at the last session, but it's always helpful to go ahead and download it and keep it for your records. And I'm going to put that linked in the chat box for you.
Thank you very much, Liz. Oh, now we're right back to you, Dr. Davis. So it was a quick break we gave you, but it was a break nonetheless. All right, Dr. Davis, during the last WebEx, it was noted that reportable behavioral psychiatric events are reportable if they result in an injury of any kind, a red mark, a bruise, etc., to another person. If the aggressor is on a behavior support plan, this event would be reported on the consolidated REF, right? And by the consolidated REF, Dr. Davis, we're talking about reporting like we kind of now, like the reporting variants where they can report on a monthly basis. So
I'm not sure that will be reported on the consolidated REF, will it? Because the consolidated REF, my understanding was that was going to be related to restraint, not to injury. But if I'm mistaken in that, please correct me.
Liz?
Dr. Davis, you're correct. That information does not go on the consolidated REF.
So to clarify,
Yeah.
that would be individually reported.
Right.
Correct. So if there is a behavioral or psychiatric event that results in an injury to another person, you'll want to report that on an individual REF. That does not belong on the consolidated REF.
Thank you. That is very helpful. And Liz or Dr. Davis, does it matter whether or not the victim required treatment or not?
No.
So no matter what the injury is, it needs to be reported separately.
Correct. And
Thank
keep
you,
in
ma'am.
mind, just to throw this out there, if they injured another person supported, that person supported would also have a REF submitted if they had to have treatment at an urgent care or ER. So keep that in mind as far as if there's a victim that was a housemate and they had to get treatment for their injury at urgent care or ER, you would want to do a REF for them too.
Thank you so much, Liz. All right, Dr. Davis, another question we have pre-submitted. We have a couple of persons supported who have G-tubes and have a history of pulling them out. As a preventative measure, we put a bodysuit on under their clothing. It does not restrict movement, but simply protects the area and places a barrier over the G-tube. Would this be considered protective equipment as defined on the form titled Important Definitions to Remember for Additional Behavioral Events and Interventions?
Okay. Yes, in the past, we have considered that protective equipment. Now, I'm not trying to characterize it as the most severe type of protective equipment that we have out there. The concern is that if a person is experiencing discomfort and they're removing their G-tube because of discomfort, you know, we don't want to be in a position of ignoring their discomfort to just make it where they can't make those adjustments. I mean, so in other words, we need to do our due diligence to try to find if there is some sort of a solution to the discomfort that they're experiencing. Obviously, we don't want people pulling out their G-tubes. And so what we have done in the past with this is we've had those reviewed through our statewide behavior support committee, and we have come to the conclusion in most cases that we're going to provide a variance to allow the continued use of that without a fading procedure because of the risk to the person. Under the new system, I suppose they're going to review those things within the context of the settings committees, and that they will probably come to a similar finding in most cases. In individualized cases, they might say that it's going to, you know, that they're going to have a more aggressive type of fading plan for it. But that would be actually quite an outlier from what we've done in the past.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Davis. And Dr. Davis, I recall from just interactions I've had with you and your staff that if folks have a question, they can reach out to the behavioral units in the regional office, no matter what waiver program they are in, and you all can provide guidance on these types of questions.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Jason, I'm coming to you. There you go. Jason, I'm sorry, you look like a hobbit. Like your ceilings are so low in that house and you are so tall.
I live in a tiny, tiny home.
You do. You do. It just tickles me. I'm sorry. Jason, I'm confused about the therapy system go live dates. I keep hearing that the go live date is 8/1/21, but in the therapy presentation a few weeks ago, I thought the date for using therapy for reportable event forms and investigations was next summer. Could you please clarify?
Sure, and that's a good question. Once the therapy system is online for providers, therapy will provide the training through their learning portal. Unfortunately, a date for the accessibility by providers has not been determined yet at this time.
Thank you, Jason. And Jason, I actually got to sit in on one of those therapy meetings this morning. And by looking at this question, I think that there may be two different things here. It's talking about the ref being in therapy and investigations. So while they're both part of the reportable event management, I think I heard there's a possibility that one may go live before the other. Is that accurate, that the move is to get the reportable event form in as a #1 priority?
Yes, so the investigator, the REM or the REF rather, has been put as a top priority and should be the first thing that would come out of it. And investigations piece would be following that as well. So yes, the REF has been moved to the front of that list.
Thank you, Jason. Now, Jason, we have another question for you.
Okay.
The PRER team, provider, yeah, provider reportable event. Help me here, Jason.
We can go to the provider reportable event review team.
Oh, wow. Okay. It's a mouthful. Is it is there a specific number that is required to be on that team? And anyone listed, do they have to be CPI certified?
So the contracted providers must establish a PRERT with the defined membership and representation as specified in each of the event management policy, or each provider's event management policy rather. The provider should consider including as members of the event review committee people supported and or family members. The second part of that is there is no requirement for anyone on the PRERT to provide to be a provider investigator. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, that says CPI. So no, certified. They have to all be CPI certified. That is not a requirement as well.
Thank you, Jason. I think it was good clarification, though, that person, that team needs to go through, that there's one person that needs to go through the provider investigator training. And the next question kind of leads into what you just said, Jason. The person named as the provider investigator, can they also be the event management coordinator? Oh, look at the top of my head. I'm sorry. I'm making fun of you. You can only see my hairline. Okay.
So yes, staff identified and having completed. I'm sorry. The question regarding which one was this again? Single person placement provider. Is that where we're at?
No, sir. We're at the one right above that regarding whether or not the provider investigator can also be the event management. Yeah.
Yeah. And the answer to that is yes. The staff identified and having completed the certification process can fill additional roles within the provider. So yes is the answer to that one.
Thank you, Jason. And I think lots of people probably think you're psychic because I'm about to read the question you thought you were answering. We are a single person placement provider for our son. Are we required to have a monthly reportable event meeting, or can we have one less often?
So the answer to that question, the REM protocol does require these meetings to be held at least monthly to review all events and investigations. If there have been events, ostensibly that's going to be a short meeting, but this should be documented in your monthly reports as it relates to the PERT. I'm sorry, the PRERT.
Okay. Okay, Jason, this will be for you. Apparently, if you need assistance, I can help you according to my sheet I
I'm
have. Yeah,
definitely
just
tagging you in on.
no, but on page 4, section Roman numeral 2, in last sentence of the first paragraph of the operational protocol created by TennCare and DID, the paragraph reads as follows. When reporting unexplained or unexpected deaths, providers must inform the DIDD on-call investigator and MCO of the person's do not resuscitate DNR order, if applicable, safety plan, and an attestation signed by staff that the lack of life-saving actions was justified and preferred by the person. I'm going to pause here for a minute and let everyone know that there will be a change to the protocol. It will be updated. Katie and I had some long discussions in the past couple of weeks, I think, and it will be updated to no longer require that attestation form. So you will, just to let you guys know, that will be updated. The update will be placed on the web page and it will no longer require that form. In recent years, we've received feedback from the Middle Tennessee Regional Office. And for those of you on the call who may not be a 1915C provider, DIDD divides up our regions, Middle, East, and West, and each one has a regional office where they have different units and different staff that assist providers in that geographic region. In recent years, we have received feedback from MTRO concerning do not resuscitate orders. We have been told that provider personnel should perform CPR during an event and that the DNR only applies to medical personnel. The only exception I'm aware of is when a person supported has a hospice plan of care, in which case a DSP would not attempt to resuscitate. The statement attestation signed by the staff that a lack of life-saving action was justified is confusing. All right, well, that's no longer going to be required. So we realized that that was going to be confusing. So we eliminated that from the process. I want to tackle this first part. There is a statute that talks about medical personnel and first responders, and that those individuals have to honor a do not resuscitate order, meaning that if a person has a do not resuscitate order in place, they cannot go against that order. That order is applicable to these specific types of individuals. Back, I think it was in 2007, a AG opinion was requested regarding whether or not this was applicable to direct support staff, home health aides, DSPs, non-licensed persons and persons that were not considered to be first responders. The AG opinion that was written, and you can still find it on the AG website, speaks to the fact that that statute is not applicable to these individuals, that they are not licensed healthcare providers or licensed medical personnel, and that they do not fall into the category of first responders. All that legally is to say that unlike a nurse or unlike a EMS worker, a DSP does not have to honor a DNR. So they would not get into any trouble if for some reason they didn't honor it. If they just, I guess they just didn't feel comfortable in not performing CPR. However, they are not required to follow it, right? Obviously, they're not required because the statute doesn't tell them to be required. But being not required to follow it does not mean the same thing as that they are required to perform CPR. So whereas they're not held to, if they don't follow the order, there could be ramifications to their license or to some part of their medical profession because they're not considered that. There is absolutely no reason that any provider should think that DIDD or anyone else believes that every DSP should ignore a do not resuscitate order. Please, I mean, we're very person-centered. We want to follow people's wishes. If there is a do not resuscitate order, you follow your provider agency's policy, which hopefully, is to respect the person's wishes. But there is absolutely nothing that says a DSP must perform CPR even if there's a DNR in place. And I don't know how that confusion maybe got out there, but I apologize. And hopefully that provided clarification for you. Jason, do you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think you covered pretty much all of it. As it says, the requirement for that attestation has been removed from the REM protocol or will from the REM protocol, so that should
Right.
clear things up.
Absolutely. And I don't think that attestation is actually required right now in any of the 3 programs. So um, nothing will change for anybody who is a provider in any waiver regarding what needs to be shown or submitted in regards to a DNR. Okay, so we're going to move to the questions in the chat box in just a second. I would just like to remind everyone that our next presentation will be on August 12th, and that will be centered around the dignity of choice protocol. And that discussion will be led by, Mr. Jason Allen will walk us through a PowerPoint presentation explaining that, but any questions or other information we will handle like everything else as a panel. But Mr. Allen took part in the subgroup that helped to develop the protocol. And I think there may be a couple other panelists on here too that took part. So that will be what we concentrate on. And of course, once that's done, like every other one of these WebExes, we will move on to the pre-submitted questions and then the questions in the chat box, which is where we're going now. So let me just scroll up to the very beginning, just make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, it looks like it appears that we just initially posted those websites for y'all like we do at the beginning of every chat. And first question, what if a physician's order, okay, Dr. Davis, I think we're going back to the question regarding the G-tube. And that question is, what if a physician orders it after an acute issue like surgery?
Yeah. That we generally consider that out of bounds as protective equipment. That can be used short term for that purpose without being considered protective equipment. And generally, the rule of thumb is 45 days. If it's going to go beyond that, then that's where the point at which we start saying, well, maybe this needs review. And it would be probably at that point. The concern is that it's a staff convenience issue, and we're not, providing enough care for the person. So that's the main reason I think at that point we might want to review that.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Moving down to the next question. And as always, if our response doesn't answer your question, please just put it back in the chat box or try as best you can to put it at a level which we would understand what's trying to be asked. Next question. Is or will it still be true that a consolidated ref can only be used if the agency requests this ahead of time and only if you generally have 10 or more incidents a month? Dr. Davis, I don't think we put those restrictions on here, did we?
No, in fact, what we did was basically because we used to approve reporting variances for this purpose. What we in this new policy is to say that basically, if it's included within a plan of care, a clinician's plan of care, behavior support plan, et cetera, then that would be a circumstance where we're essentially already granting this variance in the old lingo, and that the consolidated reporting can be used.
Sorry, thank you, Dr. Davis. It looks like those are all of the pre-submitted questions and the questions in the chat box. As always, we will pause for a few minutes to see if anyone has any other questions they'd like to place in the chat box. We also usually use this time to ask the panel members if there's anything that they would like to share with the group or anything they would like to announce. So if anyone on the panel would like to speak to something, this is your chance.
Nobody has anything? Not a new TikTok dance or anything to share? That's
This is amazing.
disappointing.
This may be our fastest one of these meetings. And I feel like last time there were tons of questions for Dr. Davis when we didn't have him here to answer them.
Hey, this is Skylin.
Hey, girl.
Are you surprised?
No.
I was wanting to pull up.
I'm hoping it's a TikTok dance.
Oh no, I don't even have TikTok.
Yeah,
I was gonna pull up because I wanted to reiterate just kind of what the expectation is around the consolidated reportable event form, and when the expectation is that it's used, because I feel like that the question that Kathy asked could be confusing for people who aren't really part of the 1915C side and utilizing a consolidated REF now. So if you give me just a second, I'll pull up the PRERT consolidated REF that we talked about 2 weeks ago. Can we do that real quick?
Yes, ma'am. Oh, it looks like we're buying some time for more questions to come in for Dr. Davis. So, Dr. Davis, I'll give you Skyland's email after this so you can thank her.
Yeah, that's all right. Dansby Swanson hit a home run. That was a positive thing to report while she's looking that up.
Well, that is positive, but that will all go away when they have to call into their bullpen.
Oh well, yeah, they've had to go to the bullpen, so it's nervous time. But
Nervous time. I think you and I could get it. Well, at least you. I mean, you go pitch a couple innings. It couldn't get much worse.
While Skyland's looking that up, do we want Dr.
it would
Davis
actually be
to
worse.
respond to Mystique Williams?
Sure, Dr. Davis. Please, Katie wants to move on. She's not interested in the Braves. You're from are you a Cardinals fan?
My family lives in Atlanta.
Yeah, but you're not from Atlanta.
I don't watch baseball. Sorry.
Okay, well, y'all, I hope you enjoyed having Katie with us today. All right, Dr. Davis, please.
Cardinals fan like his brother.
Yeah, Jason's a Cardinals fan.
He's a Cardinals fan, lifelong.
Yeah.
It's been a rough year for us as well.
I blame Jordan for it. I blame Jordan, not for the season, for you having to be a Cardinals fan. You are the little one. All right, anyway.
Yeah, I'm distracted.
Okay, we got a little punchy. We got a little punchy today. All right, Dr. Davis, please discuss reporting considerations for individuals who have continuous restraint due to severe self-injurious behavior, for example, a belt wrist restraint.
Yeah, I mean, that would need to be, in my estimation, part of a plan that was produced by a behavior analyst or another clinician, and that would be an example of something that would be used for which consolidated reporting would be used. The thing about it is, I'm not a big fan of people being continuously restrained like this, and they at least need to have some breaks from that, and some opportunities to be free of the restraints, and so that's a serious situation. Definitely requires oversight by a clinician, I think still is something that we need to track and keep reported. And hopefully at some point there's some fading of the use of those restraints. There should be some attempt to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Now, Dr. Davis, I didn't see any questions really pop up about this, and maybe some mention in some of the pre-submitted questions. But in the last webinar we had a lot of questions about blocking, right? And what would be considered blocking and what would be considered a restraint, and where that line is, and what types of equipment are blocking equipment, and what needs to be reported. I know that's really a complicated area, and there are lots of little intricacies, but could you provide any guidance to folks on that specific area?
Yeah, okay, so there are a couple ways I can characterize this, and I'll just give you a little bit of the history here. For some of you who may not have been around several years ago, when we had something called response interruption, that was a procedure that was different from restraint, and at that time it was any hold that lasted less than 60 seconds. And so we had a couple of kind of not very good things happening with that. One of those was that some people would, attempt to release a very brief release at 59 seconds, and then they would get the hold back, and that was not really the intent of calling that response interruption. Likewise, others pointed out that it is actually a restraint. You're still holding the person under that circumstance. I do think that there are some time guidelines that you might kind of use as a rule of thumb here to differentiate between two. First of all, in most blocks, you're not actually holding the person. You're not grasping and holding a body part with that. And so, a block would be as simple as if somebody's trying to hit me and I divert their hit and have it go past me, as an example. Using diversion as a method of blocking. Others, it might even contain an arm briefly to turn the person around and to redirect them away from them. I would still consider that a block. That's going to be, holding for less than 10 seconds, probably most cases less than 5 seconds. You're not lingering. You're not stopping the person's movement. You're just basically redirecting them in a different direction. When it becomes a restraint, generally speaking, there is a children's control position within CPI where the arms are basically folded in front of the person and they're restrained. That should not typically be used with most adults. There might be some adults for whom that would be small enough that could be done by one person. That's the only one person control position in CPI, as an example. It's generally going to be two people holding the person. In CPI, they're bent at the waist. In other forms like PCM, it's a two-person technique, though, generally speaking, and it's holding the person in a stable position for a period of time that I would say is generally beyond 5 to 10 seconds.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Let me ask you a question about a ref we actually received this week, because it kind of goes to this, and it's in relation to protective equipment. So how should protective equipment be used time-wise? I know you talked about restraints and letting go, but we received a ref where mitts were being used 24/7. So I just want to, how do we look at that? How would we look at that to see if that was appropriate or not?
Our existing provider manual, I believe, limits that to no more than 50 minutes before there's a removal of the item. If I'm, I might need to go back and double check myself, but I'm pretty sure that limit is in there. And generally speaking, I would say that's a reasonable limit. That may be a little bit longer than that in ICF settings. They may be able to go up to 2 hours before giving that break, but that is those would be a couple time frames to keep in mind with regard to reasonability.
Now I know we've spoken a lot about things being included in the ISP or the BSP, and so for a layperson like myself, I just want clarification. If it were somehow in an ISP or a BSP that mitts be worn at all times, is that something that would be appropriate, or would we ever see that? Is that something we should see, I guess, is the question I'm asking. Because we said before, if things are in the ISP.
In 100% of the circumstances where I see that, I'm going to have questions about it. I generally think that is a procedure that needs to be questioned, and that we need to understand more about why that's necessary. Now, maybe there has been adequate documentation created that helps us understand that without having to dig deeper in it. If there's not, that would be a circumstance I would be concerned about.
Okay, and it looks like we got some more questions while we were waiting on you, Dr. Davis. And this may be for Liz as well, I'm not sure. If a person's reported has aggressive outbursts in which he hits others, this requires an immediate ref because he is causing injury to others. If a response to this behavior is a restraint, then the episode of restraint goes on a consolidated ref. Liz, I think that's maybe, right? That's not a yes or a no. Okay, you're
I
muted.
think in this situation, can you hear me? I'm unmuted on both.
Yeah, you're unmuted now.
Okay. I think in this situation, I think it would be appropriate that you do, if there's injury to somebody else, that you would do the individual ref that's due within 1 day. And we would not expect you to document that on the consolidated ref as well, because it's already cited on the one ref, because we're not trying to make you duplicate your work. Of course, when you guys have your meetings and you discuss these issues, you can discuss the separate ref as well. It doesn't have to be on the consolidated. Does that make sense to you, Dr. Davis? Would you agree that you wouldn't expect that to go on the consolidated ref as well?
But we would expect it to come in on a ref because there was an injury
Yeah.
to someone else. It's
Correct.
not just a common person who needs to be restrained a few times, a month, as a pattern. There's actually, this is its own reportable event because of the injury.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, just wanted to be clear on that. I'm sorry, Dr. Davis, obviously I can't answer what she asked you, but I wanted to make sure I understood.
I'm in agreement with Liz on that.
Okay, so next question. Okay, I'm sorry, this jumped down. We're getting more. Dr. Davis, maybe. So if a person supported has aggressive, sorry, would that same be true if the person is engaged in self-injurious behavior that causes injury to themselves? The injury to self results in a RIF within 1 business day, but if a restraint is involved, this is on the consolidated ref. This would, of course, be for a person who has a formal BSP. Liz, would we have to do both in that instance?
So in this situation, self-injurious behavior is reportable by ref if there's an injury that requires assessment and treatment beyond first aid. So in those situations, let's say they went to urgent care or the emergency room and got treatment, that would be a ref by itself. It would not be a consolidated ref. But in those instances where they're doing self-injurious behavior and, maybe they scratched themselves and that's like minor first aid situation, those are the ones that we're expecting to go on the consolidated ref.
So Liz, let me make sure, Liz and Dr. Jason, let me make sure I understand. So if I cause injury to someone else, whether or not they have to go to the emergency room or to the urgent care, that's reportable because it was an injury to another person that was caused during a behavior. If I cause that injury to myself, it's a self-injurious behavior. I would have to have gone to an urgent care or an ER or receive treatment beyond that, beyond first aid, assessment and treatment. So anytime when it's someone else, but you have to reach that threshold of injury when it's to yourself. Okay, that helped a lot.
Correct.
Okay. Next question. Nope, Katie said goodbye. So I think she's already gone. So where do you find the consolidated ref? Liz or Skylin or someone who knows?
It will actually be the regular ref that you use, the one that's going to go live on 9/1. So that is found on the website. And the instructions on how to complete a consolidated ref, that is in the link that I posted before in that training for the event management coordinators. It's super simple to do.
Thank you, Liz. Skylin, I saw that you posted that definition and I saw that we had questions. Was there anything else that you wanted to say, or did it kind of get covered after, excuse me, covered after you posted that definition and there were subsequent questions?
Yep, no, we're good. I just wanted to make sure that we had that clarity in there, and I think everybody can see that in the chat. So we're good.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it. Okay, guys. It's 2:00. We're here. Dr. Davis is here. We had the schedule till 2:30. So if you have any more questions, please put them in the chat box. If you, oh, okay. Does reportable outbursts and injury include injuring staff? So I don't, those weren't even words. I apologize. I think maybe what's trying to be asked here is the injury to others. Does that include both staff, other people supported, people in the community, pretty much anyone, even Jason?
Yes. That would include staff. It would be staff, it could be their housemate, it could be private citizens, anyone else.
Okay. Go Braves. So Dr. Davis, do you want to kind of lead us out on this one? Is there anything you want to provide further clarification to? Do you want to explain? I think that there was just I want to say this politely. I think that we do require a lot to be reported, right, when it comes to behavioral incidents, but there's important reasons for doing so. It's not just because we want to make people write a lot of paperwork. And I know you briefly discussed it at the beginning, but I didn't know if you wanted to go into more. I think people think we ask for a lot to be reported. I should correct my words on that. Those some of the comments we've received.
The only thing I'll say about that is that this is one of the greatest areas of liability for states out there is in terms of the use of restraint. And the overuse of restraint is a great concern, and it has been the subject of lawsuits and other, concerns that are brought up for states. So the worst part of it is it's not a very good way of treating people. I don't deny the need for it in circumstances where maybe it's going to help people be safer, no question about that. But there are so many misuses of restraint that we've got to have a way to track that and a way to understand how it's being used, and to be able to answer questions about it when they're raised. So, that might. I guess that kind of covers everything. There's a treatment reason, there's a clinical reason to keep that. There is a sort of a moral reason to keep that, and there's a liability reason to keep it.
And Dr. Davis, I know 1915C providers would probably be aware of this. And I know the MCOs, their providers are obviously going to be aware of this because it's best practice and clinical. But as a reminder, are there any restraints or that you want to be sure everyone knows are just strictly prohibited and should never be used?
Well, according to our policy, that's prone or supine restraints and takedowns. Those are the concerns where they're prohibited. The only thing I'll say about takedowns, just a point of clarification that often comes up. Sometimes in some of the restraints that are used in various systems, a person may find their way to the ground, but it's because it's really their own momentum that is carrying them to the ground. The staff are not taking them down in that circumstance. In those circumstances, the general expectation is that they would gently guide the person to the ground, and then as soon as they're lying there, that they would back off, and if necessary, would re-restrain the person or re-engage in that whatever they were, the restraint that they were using, if necessary. So that's the only caveat I would add to the takedown as that.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. I think we have one more question. I had a reportable behavior event on 7/15 in which protective equipment was used. I have held on to it in case there were additional events that needed to be reported on a consolidated ref. So far, that individual has not had any additional events. I assume I will submit that on Monday in lieu of a consolidated ref. Is that correct?
Yes, Joy, you can go ahead and submit that on Monday.
Okay, and I'm going to act really, really, really ignorant here, and I apologize. Why would it be submitted on Monday on A2? Is it because we've now entered a different month and we didn't
Right, it's
have
the
any?
end of the month. Mhm.
Okay.
And Joy, if you're worried, one thing you could do if you wanted to, because you're going to follow the formatting of a consolidated ref where you're putting the dates and what restraint or protective equipment was used and how many times, and you'll put that in there. So it'll read like a consolidated ref should appear. So if you were to get audited or anything like that, it won't look like late reporting because it would match how consolidated ref should be written.
Thank you, Liz.
Just throwing that out there.
Okay, that is our last question. So one last time, going, gone. Do any of the panelists want to say anything? And I do want to take a moment and thank Dr. Davis for coming today. It was extremely helpful, and we do appreciate it. We know how busy you are right now with all the different clinical issues happening in the world. So we do appreciate you spending the time with us today.
It's really busy with HR, but you know.
Yeah, we won't go there. Anyone else have anything they'd like to say? All right, well then y'all, you be safe out there, and remember on our next get together, we'll be going over the dignity of choice protocol. So if you have any questions regarding that, specifically get them pre-submitted, any questions about the system. And if you think of a question later for Dr. Davis, please submit that to the REM mailbox, and we'll get with him and we'll get you an answer to that question. So we appreciate y'all. Y'all be safe out there, and go Braves.
They won.
Oh, well, good gone Braves then, I guess.
Will Smith did up there in the last inning. He did good.
Well, from your lips to God's ears, it continues, right? All right.
See ya.
Yeah, bye-bye. Y'all take care.